All right, episode 8 of Rambling About AI, where we ramble on about AI and latest news, things that have been happening in the week or last few weeks, actually, because we haven't done a podcast in a couple of weeks. But we're back at it now, and there's been some interesting stuff happening this week. I mean, Opus 4.7 that just got announced, what was it, yesterday or something like that, which is pretty cool. I haven't actually looked at it yet, and I'm excited to check it out. And yeah, so today, well, Philip, why don't you kick us off what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the most interesting things happening with some of the new models that have come out just in the last couple of weeks we've been talking about is you start to get a sense that uh, as progress is being made, you're not necessarily going to be able to keep your project or your development efforts that are aligned with like the best models that are available. And you'll probably need to find some sort of a middle ground now where this is kind of as good as the models are gonna get for us as sort of normal people who are building startups with it, which I think brings us to an interesting question that we've always struggled with at startups, which is when you build something and you sort of put it out there because you're trying to solve some specific problem that you have. So you build a website or some kind of product that does that. And you face with that moment when it's successful and you get that like rush of, yes, I built this and it works. This is awesome. That's well, did I just solve my problem? Or is there an opportunity to take this as, if not an MVP, then at least a proof of concept and turn that into a startup that I can then share with other people? And that line, we've developed heuristics for a very long time about how to make that decision just based off SaaSes and the way that, a lot of it was about moving online and sort of embracing the cloud and more of a subscription based instead of a purchase based. So these were levers that people sort of used to go down that road. But hugely different now because what we would have called features that were sort of large enough to have invested something plausibly, approaching what you do if you were actually trying to build something, those are now trivial, which means there's a lot more of that decision making happening. If I just built something that does solve a legitimate problem, so it's not a fantasy, right? But the problem that it solves is so narrow, or at least you suspect that it's so narrow that it's not going to work at the larger scale. And it feels to me like that math is somehow very different now in that, if you looked at like, well, I'm going to build an app, very few people would build apps for themselves. That was very uncommon, right? But now you're doing it, I'm doing it, people are doing it. So it's no longer, well, I built an app. Okay, yes, now let me make a startup out of it because I've got the app. Now it's, is this app actually worth investing in, even though you've already built it?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really on point as well right now. I mean, that's been my experience the last, couple of months or so that I've been doing this because exactly what you just said. I built an app. In fact, it was actually 2 weeks ago. I was like, I need a little companion app for myself that I can talk to in the car. It's kind of like a Claude Code, but on the go, mixed with GPT. But I wanted it to have access to GitHub, and I wanted to be able to send emails, and wanted to be able to do other tools, and other cool things that I wanted it to do. So I built an app. I called it Buddy. I gave him a little avatar and everything. I'll show it to you guys at some point, but it's pretty cool, right? And I think it took me maybe a day to build, a few hours. I don't know. It wasn't long. I started spending some more time on it the day after. But yeah, I was using it and I was like, damn, this is really cool. This is great. This is good for me. I mean, I was able to fix a bug on using it for someone else, and then I had it actually even fix its own bugs because it could create pull requests, and it was able to, using Railway, it was able to automatically deploy the pull request. So it was basically fixing itself. And I was thinking, man, this is such a useful app. Other people might benefit from this too. So then my entrepreneurial brain starts going, and I'm like, this could be a startup. Man, I could I could sell this to other people, and other people would use it. And it's that whole thing. I'm building a feature, or am I building a startup? That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, yeah, and the math just behind that is different enough now that we have to develop a different set of just heuristics and things for how to make that distinction because what what was, it's kind of the theme. What was difficult is now easy, and therefore it's easier to start something. But then it's also less defensible because literally anybody else can put the same code into a Claude as you can. We were talking earlier this week about the idea of what you deliver to a client as a part of the upfront um, sort of engagement process, the sales process may start to shift because we're used to giving them a certain amount of detail in order to show them that we have the vision necessary to execute on the project. But now we have to be careful not to give them so much that they can just take it and put it into
Yeah, we did
a
talk
model.
about that. For reference, we were talking about how, typically, traditionally in a sales process, you go through and you meet with the client, you do a discovery call, and then you end up writing like a proposal for them, and you explain in detail what the problem is that you discovered on this discovery call, and then you maybe done another call with them where you brainstorm some ideas, you put all that down to paper, and then you have this 3 or 4 page proposal which explains the problem, the solution, how long it's going to take, what you're going to do, what tools you're going to use, what your stack's going to be, how you're going to deploy it. You say all this stuff. And what is that? It's a prompt.
That's the prompt. That's the whole thing. Yeah.
And then basically some kid can go, oh, I can build that. And then their nephew or whatever, their niece can say, yeah, I can do that easily. Throw into Claude Code. And then they're impressing their, you know, family with this amazing app that they've produced.
Using the specs, and if the spec is the deliverable now, I mean, you didn't have to like think about the difference between what you were showing them and then were you giving away, essentially everything they needed. And when we were talking about that originally, that's what kind of steered me a little bit into thinking about this kind of feature versus startup line, because one way to start to answer that question is to ask yourself what some things that you would look at to kind of know, like what are some ways that you kind of test that out. And one of those ways might be, uh, is it enough where you can write a spec as a part of a sales pitch and then end up losing the deal because all they had to do was give the spec to Claude and Claude built it? Two interpretations of that, right? One is you made a mistake in providing them that much detail. As the salesperson, you provided them too much detail. The other way to say that is it wasn't a very good project for you to take on, because it was a project that can be solved simply by taking a spec and giving it to a coding agent. And if that is the job, if the job is building the thing, then the spec is everything. But if the job is building the spec, then you're already done. Question is, can you sell a spec? Probably not, because it's not enough of a sort of, again, talking about the heuristics we develop, right? It's not enough that somebody can look at a spec and go, I know that spec is enough that I can hand that to my coding agent. So they rely on you to close that gap. But some of them look at that spec and think, I can get my cousin who bought a Cloud subscription to do it for me. So certainly, the farther it is from the ability to do that, I think the more it supports the idea that maybe this is a startup in itself versus a feature. But it's just one way to, I think about it.
Yeah, we had a conversation earlier in the week. We talked a lot about niching down. You say, well, that's kind of like maybe the solution right now for startups is to be really, really niche. I mean, it was, we say niche, by the way. In England, we say niche. I think you say niche.
Niche,
Niche.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They
It's
both work.
variable. So yeah, we were talking this week about being more in a niche about what you do. I mean, this was definitely the case. Like even 5 years ago, I remember you had the sales forces, you had these big space companies, these big startup SaaS companies that solved everything with one. And then like as time progressed, it was much more like, well, you need to focus on one particular thing. Like maybe you're the SaaS for HVAC, or whatever it is, very very special. Now I feel like it's even more so, right? And we talked about that. Like, so how does that play into what you're talking about with this feature versus startup thing, and when it comes to like specific verticals or very niche markets?
I think uh, the more you niche down, so to speak, the more likely it is that the feature you develop is closer to something that's meaningful to build. Like, if you build a feature that's really generic, like, I mean, you can, doctor heal thyself, but like I'm working on a poll. Like I've got a question that my LLM was struggling with. It's got all this context, but the context is confusing it. But it's a relatively simple question that I want sort of a third party perspective on. So I just want to ask a simple question as much of many models as I can and get sort of a consensus answer. That functionality is super, super, super simple, right? But so that transition of saying, well, is this enough to build that startup off of? How easy is it to just write a spec to do that? And how easy is it for somebody who knows that they need to be able to do that to then just say to the LLM, I need to do that, and it will do that for them. And the only real way to kind of get a sense for how easy that is to in some mode be building it, but you're building it to kind of feel the difficulty, not for it to be easy. Because if it's easy, then anybody can do it. If it's hard, now you know that there's something that you can really kind of dive into and figure out, right? But But something generic like that, polling, that's so high level that it's just very unlikely that that's gonna survive as a feature, that would be enough to sort of justify something. But if you built something that was really specific, like you were calculating the path of a drone in a very specific course, right? That, like, you had totally dialed into, and you're like, "I can give you the most accurate version of this course that a whole bunch of drone people go on, and this is gonna be amazing." That by itself, even though that's just a feature, might be valuable enough that you could build something off of that because it's such a specialty thing, and there's been so few attempts to really, you know, ostensibly this is a theory, there's been so few attempts because it is so niche, there have been so few people that have tried to get down to that level that your ability to code essentially allows you to dive into that in a way that it did before.
So, like, I don't know if this is a good example, but today, the other day, I saw someone on X had posted this demo of someone who'd vibe coded or whatever you want to say, used Claude, OpenClaw to create a tool that basically scans all of Zillow's lots in your neighborhood, finds lots that are big enough to have a pool put in, and then it has the aerial screenshot of that backyard, and then it draws in the pool. And then it basically what it then does is it sends them a letter to say, hey, this, you could have a pool in it would look like this is what it's going to cost, call me. I guess it was, I don't know if it was built by the pool company or whether it was some dude that was like, hey, I could try and sell this to the pool companies.
Yeah.
But that right there could be a startup, right, in itself. It could be a startup. It's like, hey, we'll help you find people in your neighborhood to install pools for. That's a startup, right, a SaaS.
Yeah.
Or it could be a feature that Zillow
Yeah.
bring out.
Yeah.
You know, like, does the guy that made that, does he create a startup? Does he pitch it to Zillow as a feature? Or could Zillow be like, oh, sweet, yeah, we'll just vibe code that ourselves?
Yeah. No, I mean, that, like, as a lead gen activity, you can think of, like, lots of examples. I used that example, a couple days ago, and I was actually thinking about it last night at Startup Jacks. We were talking about, well, what if you pointed a model at a bar, like their Instagram feed, and had it use the video generators to generate them, like, a 15-second ad, like an actual kind of, "I'm gonna post this on a TV channel" ad, right? Like, can you use that as then lead gen for your TV ad service and send that to a bar and say, "Hey, I'd love to run this ad, that I made for you," without, as a just to throwing it out there. It feels kinda similar to, "Here's a pool that I can make for you. Do you want me to make this pool for you?" And that's a little bit of a transition, I think, between marketing as, like, getting people interested in it enough to engage versus just kind of giving them the product and then saying, "If you really wanna do this, then you need to pay me for it, but I'm gonna give you basically everything that we would have spent the whole first time figuring out," because the AIs can get a sense for what that is.
Yeah, on the side now, I can't imagine all these business owners just being like overwhelmed with all these people coming, hey, we can do this, we can do this, we can build this for you, we can do this. And it's like, oh my gosh, all this people telling me they can automate this part of my business, that part of the business.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, and the promises almost universally outstrip the reality. It doesn't mean reality doesn't have value, it's just that they're not usually as much as the and you only have to be burned by that a few times before you get it out there. But, it's hard to argue that if you get an email in your inbox and there's a link to a 15-second ad and you watch that and go, "Man, that's a good ad." Like, that's a pretty good advertisement for the company that makes the ads. The only question is that a tool that a company that makes ads uses to sell their ad service? Or is that a SaaS that companies who do that buy that service from because it gives it to everybody? And that, I think, is a very interesting way to resolve that solution is if it can be a feature, if it's attributable enough to a wide variety of people that you kind of make up the scale in a different way. It's just a lot harder to defend it because you're not specializing it in a way that really gives you that kind of defensibility. A lot of, when we talk to people about, they would say, like, should I do a startup? So much of a startup is about the team, it's about the people, it's about their backgrounds and how they approach problems. And that's where a lot of the success is. So while the tools will allow you to build things that you couldn't have built before, if you're not coming at these things from a place of being a deep industry expert and bringing a different perspective to them, that's what makes your version of this different from the version that they're getting when they're just talking to Claude, because Claude doesn't have your perception. So I still think you have to bring something unique. It can't just be, "I prompted Claude. I'm good at prompting Claude." That's not enough. That's
It's
not
not about
defensive.
the software anymore.
It's not about the
No,
software.
it's about all the things that wrap around the software, the people, as you say, and
It's to me a very interesting conflict that it simultaneously makes it trivial to build an app, but it makes it worthless to build an app, you know?
yeah. I mean, I can speak a little bit from experience. So, like, well, on one of the apps I built recently, and I just actually announced it and launched it. So I'm a runner, and I use Strava, but I didn't want to pay their subscription. I just funny about paying subscriptions for things that I'm like, I could probably build that. So I didn't really want to, because I knew it used AI, that Strava has a subscription you pay that uses AI and stuff like that. And I'm sure it's amazing and insightful. But I was like, I don't really want to do that. I kind of want to build my own because I want to do it the way I want to do it. Right. So I basically a tool to create running plans for me. I don't know if Strava can do it or not. Someone will probably say, yeah, of course it can. But there's obviously other apps that can do it too, but I wanted to build my own. So I went ahead and built my own app to create running plans because I was using ChatGPT, and I was like, I'll just build an app for it. And it ended up being kind of my own Strava because I was adding to it. I was adding like, buddy up with people. You can like see your splits and on all that kind of stuff. That kind of came a little bit of a Strava. It didn't take me that long. It took like 4 weeks to build it all, right? But this is an example of how like Strava could have had that feature. They might have had that feature or not. Um, I wanted to build it myself as a feature for myself, essentially, right? A feature for me.
Yeah.
But then I was like, well, let's throw it out there as an app too, and I put it on the App Store and charge $10 a month, and put a website together, and so it's kind of a SaaS startup as well now. I guess you could call it, but really, it's a feature for me. And I'm curious, like, I mean, obviously, I find it fairly easy because I've been doing this for 20 years. Are other people able to do that? And are they able to do it to the point where it actually gets to a shipped production value tool that works just for them, if anyone else too? And actually, I was chatting to one of my buddies, Anthony, and he also was building an app, has been building an app for something. I can't exactly what it is, but it's solving some specific thing that he needs solving
Yeah.
for, I think in the fitness space. And he's building it right now, and it's for himself, I guess. And he says it looks really good. It's actually working really well. But like, would you call that a feature? Would you call that, is that what people are doing now, do you think, with Claude Code?
I mean, I think a lot of people are building personal experiences like that. Um, and if you glossed over something when you were telling that story of how you decided not to use Strava and build it yourself. The idea that there were probably other apps out there from other people who did have the functionality that you needed. The One of the most common areas it seems that people have embraced building personal experiences like that is in goal setting apps. Weirdly enough, like it just
You're
seems
right.
like it's like the new to do app, right? Is like set goals. So very likely, as I say this, very likely there was another app out there that does absolutely every single thing that you wanted to do, but it would be impossible for you to find it because if you put in goal tracking running app, you would be so overwhelmed with such a flood of I made this app for myself and then I published it, that you would just never find what you were looking for, or it would take you so long to find what you were looking for that you could just have Claude do it. And that, like, discoverability distribution paradox, right? There is both more to choose from, and yet it is so much harder to choose.
Is this a good analogy? It's like someone trying to get across a field to a pub, and they're all in different paths. There's one main path that goes to the pub. It's the traditional path that everyone knows about it, but everyone goes across and they make their way through it their own ways. Everyone's got their own path and it gets them there,
Yeah.
but they didn't take the main path, the one that you're supposed to take. Is that an analogy?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a way to, like there's the right path, and then there's how hard is it to know the right path, and then there's the cost of the wrong path.
Because they would have had to cross all the way to the middle of the field to get down the right path. It was quicker for them just to go straight
It
through.
was quicker than just go straight through, and I think you really have to, we don't often, I think, do enough job putting the cost of making the decision in the same way that we talk about the decision itself. And say, well, this decision is important, right? And then and we say like if we make it wrong, it has this cost. But then bounce that against the cost of making the decision. And sometimes you'll find that the cost of making it ends up exceeding the worst case scenario from having it made incorrectly.
Mm. And another thing you could add to that analogy is the fact that the people that are going down their own path might be saying to the others, come on my path. And others are like, no, I'm going down my path. And no one actually goes down each other's paths. They all just go down their own path.
Or you
It's,
get people saying, "Come down my path and buy my $100 course so I could show you how to get down my path," right? Like, it is just if it's hard to know what the right path is, then it takes effort to find it. And the more choices there are, this has been known in behavioral economics for a long time, is even given the same outcome, even controlling for the choices that people make, if they have more options to choose from in making that decision, their satisfaction with the decision will be lower. Called the paradox of choice. So we think that by giving people more options, it makes them happier with the outcome because they can better dial in what they want. But in fact, what behavioral economics find is that people have no idea what they want.
well, that's
That's
like Steve Jobs and Apple. Like we're going to give
exactly.
them what they,
Give them what
yeah.
they're imagining that they need because they're making that decision based on emotion and pattern matching and social proof and all sorts of things that have nothing to do with what
It,
you think you're
it's
doing when you give them choices.
Yeah, it's like people don't want to be making people make decisions all day at work, always making decisions. They don't want to have to make another decision. They want someone to say to them, use this. Like, why should I use an Apple Mac? Because I told you so. Okay, as long as I trust you and respect you. That's what they said to me in 2003. Everyone was using Apple Macs. I was like, why should I use an Apple Mac? And they were like, because they're cool and I'm a designer. And do you want to be cool like me? And I was like, yes, I do. I'm going to get an Apple Mac. This is in 2003, by the way. I've been
Yeah.
using Apple Mac.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just an example
It's
of not making decisions.
yeah, of not making decisions, and maybe that's another way to say, is it a feature or is it a product? Does it sound like the kind of thing where somebody's sitting there and going, "Do I think I could vibe this?" And you want them to say, "No, probably not." And it doesn't matter whether they were right or not. That's not the point,
That's
right?
that's fair, and that goes back to the whole thing of word of mouth. Because if you say there's 1,000 goal tracking apps out there, but use mine, your
Yeah,
friend's going to be like, sure, I'll use yours.
yeah,
They're not going to go on and look at all the different goal tracking, look at the different reviews, and say, well, this one's better. If they don't want to make a decision about it, they'll just be like, yeah, sure, I'll use yours.
yeah. Or if they weren't, like, in the market for the app, and it's like, "Well, let me experience what this is like," and put it in that way. Yeah. I think it's gonna be a big shift from people who wanted it so bad to be able to take an idea that they had. We talked this before about the user builder, right? And it's the margin where it's the most interesting. It's the people that really wanted to build something but just never could because they didn't have the technical ability. Now they suddenly can. Now they've realized their vision only to find that the thing that allowed them to realize that vision has also destroyed the value in doing the very thing that they wanted to do.
This might be slightly off topic, but this week I was looking at Y Combinator and I was just thinking, man, what startups? It'll be really interesting this year to see what comes out of YC over the summer. I'm just curious because it's crazy. Because there's me thinking, oh yeah, some kind of goal tracking app that uses AI as a startup. I'm like, no, it's out there now. And then if you just do a little bit of digging around, you kind of see the subs that probably will be there at YC over the summer. And like one of them, I think you found one, and I found another one. There was one guy was in Silicon Valley. He's created this vending machine that it's an AI. He says it runs on OpenClaw, and she's got a personality and everything. She actually chooses what goes in the product. People will pay her. She has her own bank account, and it's crazy. Like this whole thing of like she basically it's her own store, and it's all in this vending machine, and people.
Yeah.
And then you found one like similar, didn't you? Like someone had created a startup that's basically an AI persona that runs
Yeah,
not
that
startup, but a
acts like
shop, like
a usual.
a
Yeah,
retail store,
yeah,
and that's crazy.
yeah. You'll I think you see those experiments and,
Mm.
like,
And
the
how the
write-ups about them aren't quite as
and our VCs, our angel investors and VCs actually throwing money into these things? Is it just a fun thing that people are like, oh, I'm just going to
I think
invest $500,000 in this AI vending machine? I mean, is it actually? That's what I'm saying.
the
I'm really curious to see what comes out of this.
the
This
landscape over the last few years has been filled with people coming up with things that were jokes when they started, and then there was just enough of a kernel of truth there, which usually isn't a good joke, right? There's the kernel of truth that people ended up learning a lesson from the joke, and then they kind of lead into it, and so you get like Dogecoin as an
oh yeah.
actual thing like an agency in the government instead of the joke, right? You have the gas town, right? There is no way that that taxonomy will end up being the best way to manage a collection of agents all doing software development tasks. So it was a joke, but then it became like real. That guy got a job at a big company, and the guy who built the framework underneath him got another job at another company. And like these are real consequences from jokes, and it makes it very hard to laugh.
So back on the feature thing. So like these big companies, like the big Fortune 500 tech companies, bringing out a new feature, is that as exciting these days? I mean, because that used to be the way it had to be, right? You had these giants like Adobe, and they bring out a new arm to their business. They're going to bring out like obviously Photoshop has been around a long time, but let's say they're bringing out like some movie tool or whatever it is, and that used to be how it was. That they would bring out a new software or feature, if you like, and then they bring out little features from that, and that was how everyone followed and did that. That's how people got their new software. And then there was like startups coming up against them saying, well, no, we can build that feature and we're just going to focus on that solely.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think about that with it when it comes to the Slacks and the kind of modern day, the Zooms and the modern day SaaS companies out there bringing out a new feature? I
I
mean,
I think you've seen them really struggle with that because in a lot of ways, where AI is the strongest is in overcoming the deficiencies in those very products, right? The idea that this UI is too complicated, so I'm just going to chat with an agent instead who's going to use the UI for me is essentially saying that the UI is not very good. And so when a company that makes the UI thinks, well, how can I introduce an AI agent into this? It seems like what they're saying is it's by disambiguating exactly the thing that I had built before. And so when that's the best path forward, but then they choose not to take that path. They choose to add an add-on feature or bolt the chatbot onto the right, in a sort of detached way. It feels very much like we don't actually want to lean into this too much because it might kind of expose how little we're providing once this functionality
you
exists.
kind of see some of these big guys. You kind of see them squirming a little bit because they go, "Oh,
Squirming's a good
squirming!
word
You got
for
to
it.
add an AI
Squirm.
panel. Add an AI panel. Click on that, and then it's like, "Hi, I'm here to help you." You're like, "I'm good. I'm using the tool already. I don't need a little helper assistant thing."
Yeah,
But we
thanks.
added AI. We added AI.
Well, to the extent that box checking is cliche, it's like the worst version of that. And I think every time you see the chat button bolted onto the side, you should read that as like
Mm-hmm.
one of my investors called and said we needed AI, and this is all I could come up with.
Right. 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 Exactly.
I
Yeah.
can't fault him for it, but at the same time, it sticks out like a sore thumb when you're actually thinking about usability.
Yeah, I mean, so this topic really is kind of what we were talking about early on about is SaaS dead? That was one of our early little podcasts, and it's kind of the same question, really, isn't it? I mean, it's like if you're a startup founder, you're looking to build something, are you building a feature for something that already exists that you just wanted to build, like I did? Are you building a startup that actually is solving lots of people's problems, or is it just your own problem you're solving? Can you make money? Can you make money from it at the end of the day? Because that's the whole point, right? It's about having a business, right? That you can
Yeah,
sell software, the software, the service to others. And maybe it's not about that. And we talked about this last podcast. It's maybe not so much about the software now, it's about the service.
it's about the service. And I think that the software, like the ability for you to translate an individual need into a solution for you, for that individual need, right? That has a certain amount of effort. And like that effort has gotten a lot lower, where now it's just that much easier to express exactly what you want and kind of dial it in. But there's a second level of effort, which is like the level of effort to make the thing that worked for you, your personal experience, work for some larger subset of people, i.e., your customer base you're going after, right? So it's not that has to work for everybody, but you have to pick some larger population of people to support that. And that means that the product's going to be different by definition because it supports that many other people, which means it's going to be slightly less useful for you. So you're in a way giving up its ability to solve your problems and trying to solve this larger population, but you also run into a whole different set of problems at scale. You and me sitting here using Claude Code, we don't often run into usage issues. I mean, we do in the sense that we use it up, but we know our way around it. Once you start doing this for other people, rate limits become a very, very, very strong you know, component of that. But so as an individual building a tool, you don't have to worry about rate limits. But if you're going to build it for somebody else, you will have to worry about rate limits. But then at the same time, they would not have to worry about those rate limits if they built it themselves. So you have both created and are solving the same problem in that you created the need to deal with these rate limits by deciding to turn it into a business. You're solving that problem by building a queue with the rate limiting in it, and so you think, wow, I'm providing value. But in fact, you provided no value because the individual person who'd have built that for themselves would not have had to worry about the rate limits. And so they didn't actually provide any value to your customer base. They only provided value to you because you chose to expand like that. And I think that's a trap a lot of people fall into is they see doing this once is easy, doing it many times is hard. And that's usually, again, talk about like heuristics, that's usually a good indication that you should do a startup there because that means there's economy in the scale. And economy and scale is something you only really capture by investing a lot of money into it. But if the scale problem is only from the scale and it's not from actually providing the value, if it's only being provided from the scale, then in fact, you're not solving any problems. You're not adding any value. You're only dealing with your own mess, so to speak. And I think that's very, very hard for people to think through because as engineers, as people in the space, we get excited about the idea of solving problems and we're conditioned to think that problems that are hard mean that there's a lot of value in them because it means nobody's been able to solve them. And I think that what kind of problem you're solving is a lot different.
That's interesting because it's like it's so easy for us to solve our own problems. It's the default like entrepreneur thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to solve my problems. But
And
you,
it's gotten so much easier.
yeah, exactly. But it's interesting when you say that because it's like actually getting out of your comfort zone and finding sitting in someone else's problems and helping them maybe figure that out. Because I think there's a lot of people that are in these spaces and they recognize these problems and they don't know how to use Claude Code. You know, they're not the types of people that would just solve their own problems using Claude Code. So it's like for someone like me who's a builder and likes doing things in maybe the productivity space or the running space, like maybe sitting in spending a couple of days in a company where I have no idea about what's going on, you know, and then seeing them find these problems, that could be a good way for builders to get into a space that's not they're not familiar with, not comfortable with, but there's probably an opportunity there for them.
There is probably an opportunity. And I think for a lot of people that are coming out and thinking about wanting to be a builder in this space, I think getting to know the domain that you're sort of have an inherent interest in, but we think there is opportunity, it's kind of moving quickly, it's evolving, and you kind of want to be there because the the value that the background information gives of the real problems they hold, that was always important. Like it was important to be able to do that. But I think it's even more important now because it's so much harder to tell whether something is easy or hard now, because things that were hard are now easy and things that were easy are now hard. So everything got kind of mixed up. So if you if if you are in the industry, if you're dealing with the problems every day, if you're feeling the pain, even though you're there, then you know they are real problems. But if you're just looking at an industry from outside and seeing something not happening and saying that thing not happening, that's the problem. Therefore, I can make that thing happen. And therefore, that's what my startup is going to do. That's very dangerous because you don't actually know whether that is actually a problem worth solving.
And there's also the opportunistic thing too, like being in there at the right place at the right time. Like if you can see the problem and you can see a solution and no one else is doing it, jump in, get in there quick because it is a time for being opportunistic and
That's
jumping on
right.
these things.
But don't lose track of those three things, right? You have to see the problem, you have to be able to deliver it, and then you have to make sure there's not a thousand other people jumping in the exact same pool, wearing the exact same swimsuit, and you're expected to stand out. Like you got to like understand that it's not just about I had this idea and I built it and here's my app now. Like that used to have a certain amount of impressiveness, but I can do that right now. And enough of the agentic stuff that's set up could stand that website up beginning to end with payments and whatever, doing whatever was simple enough for it to build in one shot. So Having the website now is no longer proof of anything other than the ability to purchase Claude. Having an app is no longer proof of anything other than the ability to to get Claude. So what is then the proof? What is it that you look at? And I think it's still going to be the people. If I want to know what Y Combinator is going to do, I'd be willing to bet it just ends up becoming about the people. Turns into college, right? You look at their application. Colleges have applications. Y Combinator has an application. Right now, Y Combinator's application is what is it you're coming to Y Combinator to build? But already we know that most people that go into Y Combinator come out with a different startup than the one they went into. So why even pretend you're going in
It's
with
just a job interview.
it's just a job interview. It's
Mhm.
like entrepreneurship at a certain point. It's just that their model is to spin those companies out relatively quickly instead of nurturing them. I mean, if the ability to demonstrate technical skill set is no longer the thing to use to identify people, then what are you going to use? You're going to use their school, you're going to use their experience, you're going to use all the same things we use in a job application. It's just they were just going to call it Y Combinator Inc. now, and it's going to be like a little incubator
Yeah.
to the extent that it isn't already.
It will be interesting to see what comes out this year. I can't wait to see stuff that comes out of YCOM. I did have a comment earlier on something you mentioned. I was going to also say that it really helps if you're in the space already and you've got a leg up. If you're recognized in, let's say, staffing or you know, headhunting or something like that, and you're like recognized in that industry and being one of the top people, and then you decide to bring out an app in Claude Code, you're going to have a leg up. As someone who's new to that space and has also built an amazing killer app
Yeah.
with Claude Code, they are the person that's got that leg up in the industry is already going to do way better.
I mean, I think it
Because it's about having respect as well in that in that industry and being recognized and having that clout that you've probably gained over the last 20 years of being in that space.
you use, I think, a word there that was important in trying to say that like the respect that you display to your customers is a part of how you're perceived.
It's trust.
And I think going into an industry that you don't know, that you don't have any background in, that you don't have relationships, distribution, and going in and saying, I built an app that solves your problem. Even if you did, no one's gonna believe you because you're not bringing anything to the table that sets you apart from any other person in the entire world that can just say those words out loud and manifest something with Claude Code. You're not distinguishing
which
yourself
is why which is why it's important to have a co-founder. You know, like earlier we talked about maybe if you're in a specific space you're comfortable with and you go into a space you're not comfortable with, if you find a co-founder in that space who has got the recognition and respect, and you're the builder, that's the perfect pair right there.
that's the perfect pair, and maybe you're keying on something here that, we always talk about the importance of having a co-founder and in terms of just managing your emotional, you know, experience as you go through it. You're always bouncing off each other, but maybe there was always a tendency for technical people to not have the kind of relationships outside of their job that they can leverage to start a company. But maybe the business person is not really as much about the business side as it is about the distribution, the relationships, the knowledge, and the technical co-founders there to focus on the software. And it's just the unicorns used to be able to do it, but now I think it's just you can't do both. It requires too much specialization on the tech side to get past what Claude Code can do, that the only way to gain that level of knowledge is to bypass the parts of it where you learn how to be a networker and build relationships over a long period of time and like you only have a certain number of hours a day, right? And so you can use that time developing and becoming more technically proficient, or you can use that time in building relationships. Both of those things are valuable, but it is very, very helpful to specialize in that.
So how would you summarize this feature versus startup thing then? Basically, we're talking about what, based on what we've talked about, what would you say would be a sort of takeaway to summarize this?
If you had an idea before AI assist for a feature like startup, I will say, without knowing the difference, and you feel like AI coding has now given you the ability to do that, you should not do that because everyone else that was also thinking that didn't do it also has the ability to do that. And you don't know how many people those are because it just so happened to be a thing. So you have to find some angle on it that you bring to the table that sets you apart, not from everybody that you can find that's doing it, but everybody that could hypothetically do it because you were someone who could hypothetically do it just a few months ago. So you really have to put on a different set of shoes before trying to think that the thing that gave you the ability to do what you always wanted to do is now something you should actually wield and accomplish.
Yeah, for me, my response to that would be, and based on what we just talked about, is to find someone who is in that space and is really well respected and recognized in that space, that maybe can or cannot code with Claude Code, doesn't matter. Being able to find someone in that space and then being able to build what you were thinking of building with them
Yeah.
would be maybe a good way to approach it.
Co-founders have always been about filling in the weaknesses of the other person. And if that has done nothing more than absolutely ratchet up the importance of that, then being able to be the technical person and the business relationship person is only getting more and more difficult.
Exactly. So if you're a running coach and you're in that space and you're well recognized and respected, let me know after the show, okay? All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. Thanks, everybody. And again, if you've got any questions or comments, drop them in below, and we'll see you.
See you next time,
See you
guys.
next time. Cheers.